Hi, I'm Vinara. At my own housewarming party, my parents smiled, drank my wine, and watched as my camera sank into the koi pond. Later, they just said, "Oh, it was an accident." But you don't accidentally toss $5,000 of gear into water. You don't accidentally lie in front of a crowd. And you definitely don't accidentally try to erase someone's career. That night, I realized something. They weren't just careless, they were calculated. So I stopped being careful, too. Want to know what I did next? It was supposed to be a celebration, a new beginning, they said, a fresh start for the family. But when I pulled up to the beige stucco house in Scottsdale, Arizona, the only thing I felt was the weight of old memories I couldn't seem to shake. The heat clung to me the moment I stepped out of my car, not just the dry desert air of early summer, but something heavier. The kind of heat you feel in your chest when you're about to walk into a room full of people who forgot to miss you. I adjusted the hem of my blouse and checked my reflection in the side mirror. My hair was neat, makeup done with care, and yet, I felt like a child again. That awkward, invisible youngest daughter showing up alone, without fanfare, without expectation. My sisters had probably been there for hours. The door opened before I reached it. My cousin Mara, the one who still called me V, even though I hated it, offered a distracted wave. "Hey V, you look nice. Drinks are in the back." And that was it. I followed the sound of laughter into the house. Music was playing, the kitchen counter was covered in catered trays, and the living room smelled of fresh paint and citrus candles. There were people everywhere, distant relatives, neighbors, old friends, all hugging, clinking glasses, celebrating this so-called new chapter of my parents' life. No one seemed to notice I'd arrived. After standing awkwardly near the entrance for a few minutes, I spotted a place card on the dining table, my name scrawled across it in loopy handwriting. Vinara. 2 R's, like I was some exotic dish on the menu, mispronounced and barely remembered. And the seat? Right next to the guest bathroom. I sat down anyway, folding my hands over my lap, trying to tell myself it didn't matter, that I wasn't here for recognition, just to show support. But then came the toasts. First was Cressida, the eldest, always perfectly put together, her smile gleaming like it had been engineered in a lab. "Mom and Dad," she said, raising her glass, "this house is proof that love wins. You taught us resilience. This home, it's your legacy." Applause, whistles. Then Leora took the floor, all bright eyes and well-timed tears. "I remember painting this kitchen with you, Mom. Every tile in this place has a memory." They laughed. They cheered. No one mentioned the summer I spent driving back and forth from Tucson to help with renovations, or the $20,000 I wired to my father's account when their old home sale fell through during COVID. I sipped my wine and stared at the centerpiece. It was hydrangeas, my mother's favorite. Then came the crack, a sharp, accidental sound. My niece, Cressida's daughter, had knocked over a photo frame while reaching for a juice box. Everyone gasped. She picked it up, blinking in panic. "It's okay, sweetie," Cressida cooed. "Don't worry about it." But my eyes locked on the frame as she held it up. It was a family photo, one I remembered taking 5 years ago at a Christmas dinner. Except in this version, I wasn't there, or rather, I had been cut out. Literally. The edge of the picture was jagged, like someone had trimmed it to fit the frame better. My arm was still there, barely. But my face? Gone. "Guess it's lucky," someone muttered. I didn't see who. That part was already missing. I got up from my seat without a word and walked over. My fingers brushed the glass, collecting a sliver. It drew a drop of blood, just enough to sting. I laughed under my breath. Of course, I wasn't fully in the picture. Back when they bought this house, my parents had been overwhelmed. The down payment had come due before their other property closed. I'd written a check, no questions asked. I was still recovering from being laid off in a shrinking education tech startup, but I did it because they were my parents. Cressida said she'd be in charge of interior design. Leora oversaw the contractor meetings. I was the one who cleaned the dust after the workers left, painted baseboards in the heat, made grocery runs. And yet now, as the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the polished tile, I stood invisible in a celebration I'd helped build. I walked out onto the back patio, where my mother was seated with a few of her old bridge club friends. She looked up and smiled, then paused. "Venara, you okay?" I didn't answer. She glanced at the thin trail of blood on my hand. "Oh, honey. It was just a silly accident. Don't be dramatic." Dramatic. That word echoed through my skull. Dad appeared behind her, drink in hand. "This party isn't about you, sweetheart. Try not to make a scene." Make a scene! I turned away before my mouth could betray what I was thinking. My heels clicked softly on the stone patio as I made my way toward the edge of the yard. There, behind a flowering creosote bush, I let myself breathe. My eyes burned. I wiped them quickly. No one would see me cry. Not here, not now. I pulled out my phone, opened my notes app, and stared at the words I'd typed weeks ago and never sent. They only remember me when they need something. And it was true. I wasn't invited. I was used. Used to clean, to pay, to smooth things over. Used. And then edited out of the picture when I was no longer convenient. A slow wind brushed across the patio, rustling the edges of the tablecloths. I watched as a napkin floated gently to the ground. People inside laughed. Glasses clinked. The music changed. My hand trembled slightly as I put the phone away. And then, something shifted. It wasn't a loud decision. No thunder, no crack of defiance. Just a quiet resolve settling in my bones. I turned back toward the house, straightened my spine, and walked through the open door. I didn't have to shout, but I would no longer whisper. So I turned around, stepped back in, and found my voice. When I re-entered the living room, the golden lights drifted across white walls and mirrored surfaces. The laughter seemed louder now, or perhaps it was just me, alert to every nuance. I walked past the buffet table, my heels whispering across the new tile, and paused by the drink station. I needed water, just to steady myself. As I poured iced water, I heard it, fragmented, harsh. "She's so dramatic, probably wants attention again." It was my sister, Leora, seated with her friends by the window. Her tone was low, but her words carried. I froze mid-breath, my glass stalling in mid-air. My throat tightened. I didn't turn immediately. I couldn't risk drawing notice just yet. Not until I was ready. Inside, something resigned in me, but something else sharpened. I settled back into myself and continued walking into the next room. The slideshow had begun. Our father stood by the projection screen at the far end of the hall. He cleared his throat. "Let me take you down memory lane," he began, voice smooth and practiced. The lights dimmed. A series of images glided across the screen. Black and white weddings, childhood milestones, beach vacations with my parents and sisters. Everywhere the old familiar moments, smiles, embraces, new houses. Except me. I watched the sequence tighten. My baby picture, blurred. A middle school recital, blurry. No Christmas family portraits of my college graduation. They were replaced with those of Cressida and Leora, their beaming faces framed perfectly, credited in captions. Our eldest daughter, photographer of the family. Leora leading our design vision. I caught my breath. The guests clapped at each slide, spoken like blessings. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. How many nights had I sat in front of my laptop rewriting renovation plans, emailing contractors, budgeting expenses, all so this place could exist? How many times had I watched them take credit for my labor under polite, loving language? I backed away to the fringe of the room, my glass hanging half full in my hand. The sting in my chest loosened, replaced by a cool, determined burn. My mind flickered back to the summer before the house purchase. My job in education tech had been shrinking, but I refused to let them struggle. So I picked up freelance photography jobs, extra shifts, cut back on my own life so I could wire them money monthly. I drove to home improvement stores, lugged paint cans, stayed late in dust and sawdust after the contractors had gone home. I never asked for thanks, not publicly, because I believed family came first, and in my quiet, I told myself they would eventually see. But now the slideshow was telling a lie. My name didn't belong in their narrative, so they omitted me. I walked toward Aunt Noreen, who had retreated toward the back corner with a drink. She caught my eye, her expression gentle but piercing. I sat next to her. "Why aren't you in more of these photos, sweetheart?" she asked softly. I shrugged, voice low. "I guess I was holding the camera." She nodded, looking both sad and irate. "You deserve better than this." Her words landed like a gift, a hidden anchor for a storm that had been brewing inside me. I slipped out my phone and opened a new voice memo, pressing record. My voice was deliberate, quiet. "Tonight I'm documenting every omission, every slight," I said. "I won't depend on memory, I'll depend on proof." My phone buzzed, silent reminder from my cloud backup service. I tapped to confirm the autosync was still active. Inside me, lines were drawing themselves, names, dates, emails, moments, because they might forget me. But I would never forget this. I stood and walked toward the field outside, where the patio lights glowed under the desert sky. I needed air, space to think. On the soft paving stones, I paused and watched guests drift past the windows, music filtered out. I raised my glass in a silent toast to myself. "Here's to clarity," I whispered. I turned and re-entered the living room again, shoulders squared. They thought I was quiet because I was weak. But quiet doesn't mean blind. They thought I was quiet because I was weak. But quiet doesn't mean blind. Morning sunlight slanted through my dusty apartment windows, painting pale bars across the hardwood floor. I lay awake for a long moment, reminding myself of last night, the broken photo, the mispronounced name, the sting of omission. My voice memo played again, Leora's mocking laughter echoing in my ears. I paused it. Then I opened a new folder on my phone. Evidence. I rose from the bed and dressed in silence. No music, no distraction. Just the sound of my shoes on the floorboards as I crossed the living room. Outside, distant traffic murmured through the blinds. I walked to my laptop, flipped it open, and began creating subfolders. Chats, emails, awards, photos. Each file I copied felt like pulling back a curtain. My phone buzzed with a new message, the family group chat. I held my breath. "Venara, you're overreacting again," the first message read. A second. Another sibling, laughing emoji. Then, "We all have to laugh at ourselves sometimes." No apology, no concern, just dismissals, coded in familial politeness. My jaw clenched. Their words were weapons disguised as jokes. I didn't send anything. Instead, I muttered to myself, this is their favorite game. Silence, gaslight, pretend nothing ever happened. I flipped to search old texts, scanning back years. There, in messages from 4 Christmases ago, I found a photo message from a photography association congratulating me on winning a regional award. But in the thread that followed, my mother had tagged both sisters in comments. "Proud of our daughters. Leora led the gallery, Cressida framed the show." My name? Not mentioned. As if I had sprayed paint on a canvas, but left no signature. A breath caught in my throat. Their omission was intentional, repeated. Then I found a draft text my mother never sent. "Sorry if we," then erased. I stared at the blank. Around mid-morning, I heard Aunt Noreen's ringtone. She never called early. Her voice was calm when I answered. "Lunch, I have something you need to see." I looked at my reflection in the phone screen. Eyes rimmed, but steadier. I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe a few miles from my apartment. Inside, the aroma of strong coffee and morning toast surrounded us. Aunt Noreen sat across, hands folded on the table. "You've got to protect your name," she said. "Your work, your peace. They've always tried to frame your contributions as favors." She slid across a tablet. It flicked through group chat screenshots, messages from my family calling me overly sensitive, too quiet, accusing me of orchestrating drama. In the thread beneath, Leora joked, "Let her stew in silence. That's her specialty." Noreen added softly, "They weave narratives. You deserve to tell yours instead." Her words resonated deeper than I expected. A seed of confidence took root. I left that cafe carrying the weight of those messages, and a resolve I hadn't felt before. Back home, I bought a small whiteboard and a pack of dry erase markers. On it I wrote, "Truth." Silence. Name what hurt you. Backup. Document. Prepare. Then I pulled up my files and began sorting. Emails where I had been CC'd but never acknowledged. Photos with my watermark altered. Contracts in which I was unnamed. I labeled each unseen, ignored, erased. My fingers moved faster than my heart. I paused, glanced at the wall of the room. Something deep shifted. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I won't be erased again." The afternoon slipped into evening. I didn't leave my apartment. I didn't attend the remaining party events. Instead, I organized backup drives, uploaded critical emails, and duplicated files to a secure cloud. Every task felt like armor, quiet preparation for war. At dusk, I stood by the window and watched the skyline silhouette. My phone buzzed, another family message. "Hope you're staying hydrated." Beneath it, an emoji. I turned it off. The silence was louder and cleaner. They stole credit for my success. Now I'll show them what success really looks like. I stepped into the cafe wearing red, not burgundy or muted maroon, but red, striking, deliberate, undeniable. It wasn't my usual choice around family. In their eyes, I had always been the one who blended, the one who dressed politely enough not to disturb, to make myself smaller, less conspicuous. Today, I refused. Today, my color announced me before my words could. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it, eyes flicking toward me like moths pulled to a flame. Some patrons looked up from their cappuccinos, curious. Others, families tucked around brunch tables, glanced briefly and returned to their conversations. But two pairs of eyes locked on me instantly, Leora and Cressida. They were already seated on the patio, a small corner table adorned with succulents in terracotta pots and mismatched iron chairs that wobbled just enough to remind you nothing here was permanent. The Arizona sun fell at a sharp angle that morning. It was 11 o'clock a.m. on a brittle Saturday, the kind of day where the warmth felt present, yet fragile, as though the slightest touch could crack it like glass. Shadows from the overhead trellis slanted across the patio in neat stripes. Behind me, inside, the cafe hummed with familiar noise. Espresso shots pulled, spoons clinking against porcelain cups, the faint hiss of steamed milk. Out here with them, the sound seemed muted, almost rehearsed. They rose as I approached, offering polite smiles, arms outstretched. Cressida leaned in first. Her hug was brief, perfunctory, her perfume cloying. "You made it," she said, her tone sweet but synthetic, the words brittle around the edges. Leora followed, linking her arm around mine. "Glad you're here," she offered, her eyes sliding deliberately down to my dress. She didn't have to say the color was too loud, too bold, too much. The tightening of her lips said enough. She cleared her throat. "Let's talk, okay?" I nodded, swallowing a lump of nausea that rose too easily. The first minutes were painted in casual tones. They ask the kind of questions people rehearse when they want to sound like they care without actually caring. "How's your business going?" Cressida asked, reaching for her glass of iced water. "Still traveling so much?" Leora added quickly, like she was reading from a prepared script. And then, with the faintest hint of false curiosity, "Are you seeing anyone these days?" I answered all of it softly, vaguely, keeping my words neutral, steering them to safe ground. But beneath the veneer of calm, I was studying them. I noticed the stiffness in Leora's shoulders when she spoke, the way Cressida's smile froze for half a second longer than necessary after each reply. These weren't spontaneous conversations. They were polished interrogations dressed up as brunch chatter. It was Cressida who broke the rhythm first. She leaned slightly forward, lowering her voice into something that feigned tenderness. "You should really talk to someone, Venara," she said, letting my name hang. "You've been off lately." The words lingered in the air, heavy with implication. Leora joined in, her tone pitched with carefully constructed concern. "Everyone's worried about you. You isolate so much." There it was, not just curiosity, not just conversation. They were planting a seed. Unstable, unreliable, fragile. They weren't asking. They were building a narrative. I felt my chest flush hot, but outwardly, my voice remained calm. "I appreciate concern," I said evenly, but isolation doesn't mean instability. For a flicker of a moment, their masks cracked. They had expected me to stumble, to deflect, to laugh nervously, and let the suggestion stick. Instead, I had pressed the word back into their hands. I saw surprise, then calculation, flash behind their eyes before they recomposed themselves. Brunch unfolded with deliberate slowness. Plates were served, omelets folded neatly, fruit arranged like an exhibit. Forks tapped porcelain, conversations ebbed and flowed around us. I checked my phone under the table more out of instinct than intent, and that's when the air inside me shifted. An email, forwarded from a client. Subject line, draft approval. I tapped it open, pulse quickening. The attachment loaded slowly, as though savoring the moment of revelation. And there it was, my work. 3 of my photographs, copyrighted, layered into a pitch deck. But the credits beneath them didn't bear my name. They read instead, Creative by L, Scott Designs, Layora's firm. My grip on the phone tightened, knuckles blanching white. It wasn't just theft, it was public theft, paraded in front of clients, stripped of my name and passed off as hers. My veins burned with violation, fury pulsing hot. I raised my eyes slowly, steadying my breath. Across the table, Leora tapped her foot beneath her chair, a small nervous rhythm she hadn't noticed she'd betrayed. For a split second, her face flickered. Focus lost, mask cracked. And I knew. She knew I knew. I cleared my throat, lifting the phone just enough that the screen's glow cast light across my face. You didn't think I'd find out? My voice wasn't raised, but it carried, slicing through the cafe's gentle hum. Lyora's fork paused midair, suspended like a guilty hand caught. Cressida coughed awkwardly, glancing between us. Let's not make this ugly, Cressida murmured quickly, palms open as if to soothe. It already is, I replied, each word clipped, certain. And I'm documenting everything. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was thick, vibrating. Even the waiter seemed hesitant when he appeared with the check. I didn't wait for discussion. I slid my share of the bill in crisp cash across the table, my gaze locked on theirs. Next time, I said, voice calm, deliberate. Don't call it brunch. Call it what it is. A setup. My chair scraped against the concrete as I stood. Their faces stayed frozen, mouths parted slightly, but void of reply. I walked out into the harsh Arizona sun. It wrapped around me like a spotlight, unforgiving but clarifying. The sky stretched wide and sharp, the air dry enough to crack. My phone buzzed in my hand as I crossed the courtyard. A text. From Aunt Noreen. Call me when you're ready. I have something you should see. I typed back, fingers steady now. I'm ready now. And as I walked away from the cafe, from their smiles that felt like masks, from their words crafted like traps, I held my red dress close to my frame. It no longer felt like a risk. It felt like armor. Inside me, a line had shifted. I wasn't the one being defined anymore. I was the one keeping records. The morning light hadn't yet shaken off the gray of night when I pulled up to Aunt Noreen's street. The houses here were smaller, older, lived in, porches with peeling paint, wind chimes catching the faintest stir of breeze. My car engine ticked as it cooled, but I didn't get out right away. My hands rested tight on the steering wheel, knuckles pale. The tension wasn't fear. It was pressure, years of silence compressed into something harder, sharper. I inhaled deeply, letting the air scrape down my throat. I whispered to myself, "You're not coming here as the quiet daughter anymore. You're coming to unmask." Her front door was ajar when I climbed the short steps, a sliver of space inviting me in. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and lavender sachets. Beige walls were lined with photographs, sepia portraits of ancestors, candid shots of children long grown, weddings and birthdays where laughter had once been genuine. I paused for a beat, letting those images register. These walls told stories, but they also bore witness to the fractures no one admitted aloud. Aunt Noreen sat on her vintage sofa, its cushions indented from years of use, a crocheted blanket draped carefully over one armrest. She wore a navy cardigan despite the warmth, her posture upright, but her expression heavy with something urgent. Her eyes found me instantly, scanning, steady, as though she had been waiting a long time for this moment. "I've stayed quiet too long," she said, her voice low but deliberate, almost conspiratorial. The timbre carried the weight of confession. "You deserve to see what's been happening behind your back." My breath caught as she leaned forward and slid a manila folder across the coffee table toward me. Its edges were worn, corners dog-eared, the weight of it undeniable. My fingers hesitated before I touched it. When I opened the flap, the contents made my stomach twist. Inside were printed screenshots, family group messages, carefully saved emails, transcripts of voice calls, each one curated, organized, not rumor, not paranoia, evidence. At the center was an audio transcript clipped from a Zoom call. The names on the participant list made my skin prickle. My siblings, my parents. Their words were printed in neat black ink, but the cruelty screamed off the page. "She's fragile. If she lashes out, nobody will believe her. She's already too strange. Let's just let her stew. It's easier if she stays silent." My throat went dry. I pressed play on the audio file, saved to a flash drive. The duplicity rang even clearer in their voices than on the page. Calm, casual, conspiring as though I were a problem to be managed, not family. My hand trembled on the table. Aunt Noreen reached across the space between us, laying her palm lightly on mine. Her touch was grounding, her gaze unwavering. "You're not imagining this," she whispered. "They've been building a case to erase you, to make sure if you ever spoke, no one would listen." My vision blurred, not from fragile hurt, but from exasperation so deep it felt corrosive. Finally, someone had confirmed the architecture of their deception. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't unstable. I was targeted. I closed the folder slowly, letting the weight of it settle in my lap. Then I rose, the decision already forming in me. My voice came out low but steady. No more silence. I unlocked my phone with a flick of my thumb. My draft folder already held the skeleton of a cease and desist letter I had written late one night, anticipating this exact moment. With my pulse loud in my ears, I typed into the family group chat. "To be clear, any use of my name, work, or likeness without written consent will be met with legal action." I attached the template, its clean legal language like a scalpel. Then I pressed send. The message delivered, the double check marks appearing like the tolling of a bell. For a long breath, nothing. Then the replies came, dripping with manipulation. One sibling wrote, "Threats now? You're just proving our point." Another replied with nothing but a single heart emoji, its ambiguity almost mocking. Finally, my father's message arrived. "Restrain yourself. You're tearing this family apart." I read it twice, then a third time. It was the same script as always. I was the problem. I was the disruption. I was the one tearing apart what they themselves had broken long ago. But this time, I didn't absorb it. I recognized it for what it was. Control disguised as concern. I stayed composed. My breathing slowed. My spine straightened. And then came the message I hadn't expected but desperately needed. A text from a former colleague, someone from the photography collective I once belonged to. "Saw what's happening. If you need a witness to their lies, let me know. I'll stand with you." I stared at the words until they blurred. For the first time in months, maybe years, hope flickered, small but bright, like a flame refusing to die. I opened social media, half expecting more venom. And there it was, Leora's newest post on the family feed, a photo of her at brunch, all smiles, captioned, "Some people are so dramatic. Therapy helps." I felt the sting for half a second before my brain clicked into strategy. Screenshot. Saved. I labeled it in my litigation folder, proof of defamation. When I rose from the sofa, the air in the room shifted. The heaviness of years of silence seemed to sag. Aunt Noreen stood too, her presence steady at my side. "You're not alone in this," she murmured, though her voice carried the weight of caution. I walked down her hallway, my shoes clicking against the hardwood, the family photographs lining the walls watching me as I passed. My heart pounded, not because of fear, but because clarity had finally settled. They ignored my warning. They thought they could dismiss me with gaslight and group consensus, so I showed them exactly what I meant. I would not whisper anymore. I would not fold. The war they had been waging in secret was no longer theirs to script. This was the beginning of my chapter. They ignored my warning, so I showed them exactly what I meant. The studio was cloaked in half-light when I finally slumped into my chair. Outside, the Phoenix evening was cooling, but in my small rented space, the air felt stale, weighted with hours of unspoken thought. Blueprints lay scattered across the desk, curling at the edges, overlapping legal forms stamped with black ink. Each page was both artifact and weapon. My iced coffee, abandoned long ago, sat sweating on a coaster. The ice melted into a pale, lukewarm pool. The glow of my phone pierced the dimness. Notifications had been buzzing all afternoon, a constant hum of vibration and light that I'd forced myself to ignore, until one stood out. My eyes caught on it, and I felt my stomach lurch. It was a post on a neighborhood business group Facebook page, the kind of place where people swapped contractors' numbers and gossiped about zoning permits. But this wasn't idle chatter. The post was from my father. My daughter locked me out of our shared business, froze accounts. I'm heartbroken. That last word, heartbroken, was wielded like a knife dipped in honey. Soft to outsiders, but dripping venom for me. I could almost hear his voice as I read it. Deliberate, plaintive, carefully framed to strike sympathy in strangers and ignite doubt in anyone who still wavered. Within minutes, the comments had flooded in. Condolences, outrage, judgment. Neighbors chimed in with shock. That's terrible. So sorry you're going through this. Others fumed. How could she treat her own father that way? And a few, brave or skeptical, asked for details. Do you have proof? I stared at the screen, the glow painting my fingers in cold light. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with fury so sharp it burned. Fury and disbelief at the audacity. This wasn't just a post. It was a calculated strike in the court of public opinion. They wanted to cast me as ungrateful, violent, unstable. They wanted to make my community believe I had betrayed blood. And they had chosen the oldest trick of all, a public narrative shaped in silence, one where I was not allowed to speak. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling hard, forcing the tension out through my teeth. My pulse thundered in my ears, but clarity followed close behind. If they wanted to use social currency, I would use truth. My laptop's folders glowed on the screen like vault doors. I clicked through layers of secure files, each one a cabinet of my patience, my meticulous record-keeping, videos, screenshots, audio clips, proof I had never intended to use, until now. My cursor hovered. I knew exactly which file. The koi pond. I clicked play, the video filling the screen. There it was, my phone camera slipping into water, the ripples blurring the lens as koi scattered. And above it, caught before the microphone cut out, my father's lips curling in that eerie smirk, his voice low but audible. She'll believe it was an accident. My chest tightened, heat crawling up my throat. I scrubbed through other files, finding the clip where my mother's voice followed, so calm it made me cold. It's just an accident. No panic, no concern, just serenity in the face of manipulation. I isolated the scenes, trimmed the fat, cleaned the background noise, stamped clear timestamps across the frame. My hands moved steady now, surgical. I wasn't just reacting, I was documenting. I remembered something Aunt Noreen had whispered when she first placed evidence in my hands. Let the truth speak for you. And so I did. With one decisive motion, I hit upload. The video went live on the very same community page my father had used. 3 minutes, no commentary, no manufactured outrage, just raw, unfiltered evidence. My caption was simple, sharp, undeniable. When words fail, footage speaks. For a few minutes, nothing. Then the ripple began. Notifications surged, comments multiplying by the second. I refreshed once, twice, a third time. Threads exploded. People who had rushed to comfort him now hesitated, backpedaled, or demanded answers. This changes everything, one wrote. We saw the smirk. That wasn't grief. Others tagged local news stations. Some begged me to release the full footage. A neighbor commented, "I always wondered why things never added up. Now I believe her." The tide turned faster than I dared hope. Lyora's most recent posts disappeared from the feed without explanation. Cressida, bolder or more desperate, texted me directly. "You're making us look bad. You've always wanted attention." I stared at the message, felt my pulse rise again. But this time, I smiled. Their words were no longer chains. They were proof. Proof that they had always mistaken my silence for weakness. Proof that they couldn't fathom I'd weaponize the very thing they feared most, visibility. I blocked her without reply. The phone rang next. Aunt Noreen. Her voice carried both pride and relief. "You did what none of us ever dared to do," she said. And though her pride settled in my chest, it wasn't a victory song. It was ash in the air. I knew better than to mistake one strike for the end of war. This wasn't a final chapter. It was a battlefield shift. The calls kept coming. My father this time, over and over, the same number flashing. I let it ring until the screen dimmed. Then the text arrived. "You just ruined everything. Hope you're proud." I set the phone down on my desk and let the words hover, but I felt no urge to respond. Pride wasn't what I sought. Validation wasn't his to give me anymore. He had erased me for years, reduced me to silence, made me doubt my own reflection. Tonight, I did not need his recognition. I stood in the quiet of the studio, surveying the battlefield I had drawn around me. Legal files fanned out, printed emails pinned with clips, coffee long gone cold. Witnesses. Proof. My own name written in bold at the bottom of forms that mattered. I realized something in that silence. They had crossed the line long ago. I was simply showing the world where it was drawn. For the first time in years, the air around me felt clear. Heavy, yes, but also steady. They had chosen lies. I had chosen evidence. And I knew which would last longer. The Expo Center's glass doors parted with a low hiss as I stepped inside, a rush of cool, filtered air meeting me like the first note of a symphony I already knew by heart. My steps were steady, measured. Every inhale I drew was deliberate. Every exhale carried the weight of months of preparation. This wasn't just another public event. This was the battlefield they had chosen, and I was walking straight into it with my eyes open. The lobby buzzed with that peculiar energy of trade expos, polished shoes clicking against polished floors, the faint aroma of coffee drifting from the concession stand, the hum of printers spitting out glossy brochures. Above me, suspended banners proclaimed Innovation Design Expo 2025 in oversized type. The chatter of attendees blended into a single muffled drone, a current of networking and sales pitches. My gaze stayed forward, but my mind cataloged every detail. And then I saw it. Pinned neatly across the registration desk, in a cluster of glossy flyers, was my own image. My face, cropped, retouched, and positioned beside bold letters in corporate font. Vanara Scott, co-founder, creative director. The words might have sounded flattering to an outsider, but to me, they were poison wrapped in ribbon. My pulse skipped, then steadied. This wasn't erasure. This was worse. Rewriting. Not only was I being denied credit, I was being recast as someone they created, as though my entire career was a product of their benevolence, a puppet whose strings they claimed to pull. I traced the source with my eyes. The flyers led back to a booth dressed in sleek navy drapes and steel trusses. Dad's and Cressida's newest partner brand, a carefully constructed facade for their venture, propped up on the foundation of my stolen work. Before I could move, a woman brushed my arm, a passerby holding a tote bag of branded pens and notebooks. Her smile was warm, her tone full of admiration. "Congratulations! I didn't know you were involved in this project. That's fabulous." My stomach flipped. Compliments shouldn't feel like claws, but here they did. She didn't know, of course. To her, this was praise. To me, it was theft made visible. Every sleepless night, every draft and diagram, every silent contribution, now packaged under their name and pinned with my face. I forced a small smile, nodded politely, and excused myself. But inside, fury crystallized into resolve. I didn't storm toward their booth. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I walked with deliberate calm to the volunteer check-in desk. My voice was level, even courteous, as I asked for the event organizer. Within minutes, a woman in a navy blazer appeared, clipboard tucked under her arm, eyes curious but cautious. I introduced myself. I told her plainly who I was and what had been done. Then, with the precision of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment, I produced a folder from my bag. Inside, my government ID, screenshots of the misused flyers, a formal cease and desist drafted days ago, and time-stamped emails proving that my image and name had been used without my knowledge or consent. The organizer's expression shifted, the mask slipping just enough to reveal unease. She scanned the documents, flipping pages with increasing speed, her jaw tightening. Without a word, she paged the main coordinator over her walkie. What followed unfolded almost too perfectly. Within minutes, expo staff moved briskly through the aisles, pulling flyers off boards, sweeping stacks from tables. Exhibitors whispered to one another, and then the voice came over the loudspeaker, firm and resonant. "Attention exhibitors! Any unauthorized promotional material must be removed immediately. Non-compliance will result in removal from the exhibition floor." The effect was instantaneous. At Dad and Cressida's booth, I watched staff stiffen as they were confronted. Their flyers vanished under shaking hands. Their confident smiles faltered. Dad's face drained of color, the practiced charm giving way to a rigid mask of frustration as an official motioned him toward a side room. A hush rippled across the expo floor, subtle but undeniable. Some booths turned their backs, packing up quietly. Others openly stared. People glanced from me to the stripped-down booth, whispers threading through the crowd like electricity. I didn't linger to gloat. Instead, I turned toward a nearby exhibit, my own modest display of photography. Desert landscapes, cactus blossoms captured in sharp focus, prints mounted on black foam boards. The same images I had poured into contests years ago, the kind that made strangers stop and breathe for just a second. I stood beside them, calm, grounded. My audience was small. 2 students, an older man who lingered on the detail of a saguaro spine, a couple whispering quietly. But they looked at me, not through me, and across the floor, others watched as I carried on, unshaken, while the void where my father's flyers had hung grew louder than any speech. From the corner of my eye, I caught a familiar figure. Ryan, someone I had crossed paths with at earlier design summits. He leaned against a column, half in shadow, his eyes sharp but steady. He nodded once, slowly, deliberately, an acknowledgement, a silent message. I saw. I know. The moment stretched. When the event ended, I stepped outside into the Arizona heat. Sunlight hit like fire, bouncing off the pavement in harsh waves. And there, framed in gold light just beyond the French doors, stood my mother. Meliora's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked furious, less at the world than at me. She approached quickly, heels clicking against the pavement. "Why are you making scenes, Venara?" she hissed. Her voice cracked like brittle glass. "Why are you doing this to us?" I stopped in the parking lot, turned toward her fully. My voice was steady, calm, almost gentle. "I'm not making scenes. You did this to yourselves when you took what was mine and denied me." Her face flickered, unreadable, as though part of her wanted to protest, but the words lodged in her throat. And then Leora emerged from behind her. Her cheeks were wet with tears, her arms shaking, her voice breaking. "You broke this family!" she cried, loud enough for strangers to turn their heads. "You're tearing us apart!" I met her eyes, but I didn't argue. Some words didn't deserve replies. I simply walked past them both, my footsteps sharp against the asphalt, my head held level. Later that night, back in the quiet of my apartment, I opened my laptop. My inbox blinked with unread messages, but I focused only on one, a fresh draft to Emily, my lawyer. The subject line was short and clear. They escalated. Now, so will I. I attached everything, Images of the flyers, screenshots of texts, photographs of logos, the boilerplate complaint we had prepared. I read it once, twice. My hands didn't shake this time. I pressed send. The screen dimmed. I closed the laptop slowly, letting the silence expand around me. The battle lines were drawn. And this time, they weren't the only ones holding the pen. Sunday mornings were supposed to be quiet. Mine wasn't. When I reached for my phone, groggy with the residue of half-sleep, the screen lit up with a barrage of notifications so relentless it felt like the device itself was vibrating with accusation. 38 alerts stacked on top of each other, messages, shares, tags, comments. My chest tightened as though the weight of each ping was pressing against my ribs. I slid upright in the chair of my home office. The blinds were still drawn, leaving the room in dim shadow except for the cold glow of the monitor. The blue light threw my reflection back at me, tired eyes, hair loose, expression halfway between dread and determination. I braced myself, then opened the first notification. At the center of all of it was a single post, my father's post. His profile picture hovered over words that landed like knives. With a heavy heart, I must speak. My daughter has become ungrateful, unstable, and obsessed with fame. She locked me out of our shared business, drained resources for her own benefit, and betrayed the family trust we worked so hard to build. I only share this because I know many of you care for our family. The language was calculated, designed to wound me, but to cloak him in martyrdom. My pulse jumped. I scrolled. The comments, hundreds of them, unfolded like a chorus of strangers deciding my fate. Some sympathized with him, praying for your strength. She needs help, not money. Others sneered. Another entitled kid biting the hand that fed her. And then the quieter ones, a few threads of doubt, asking, is there another side to this? But the sight that made my throat close wasn't a stranger's opinion. It was family. Leora had tapped a heart on the post, her name glowing beneath the red icon. Aunt Seraphine had left a heart emoji of her own, paired with a tidy, praying for you. My own kin validating his lie for all to see. I set the phone down, then picked it back up. I couldn't look away. I reread the post, the phrases twisting in my mind like barbed wire. Ungrateful. Unstable. Obsessed with fame. He wasn't just framing me as misguided. He was casting me as delusional, dangerous, a liability. And people believed him. I forced my hands to the keyboard, fingers hovering, but I didn't type. The urge to defend myself publicly itched in my bones. Yet some part of me knew instinct alone wasn't enough. I needed more than outrage. I needed proof. Then my phone buzzed again. A new text. Ryan. My heart hitched as I opened it. Attached was a screenshot. Time-stamped, clean, undeniable. It was a message from my father, sent the night of the party. Tossed her gear in the pool. She'll think twice next time. I stared, my breath catching hard. The image seared into me. The memory of my camera sinking into dark water, the sickening crackle of electronics frying, and my father standing there with a twisted smirk that I had once convinced myself I'd imagined. Now his own words confirmed it. He hadn't just let it happen, he orchestrated it. He enjoyed it. For a moment, everything stilled. Then my reply formed without hesitation. Thank you. 2 words. Because I didn't need to explain. Ryan had handed me more than validation. He had handed me evidence. Fuel. The rage I'd been swallowing transformed into clarity. I pulled up my legal folder, arranging windows across the screen. Dad's Facebook post, Ryan's screenshot, past emails showing unauthorized use of my work, drafts of contracts where my name had been scrubbed out. The mosaic of betrayal formed a coherent whole. I typed out a short message to Emily Carter, my attorney, my anchor in this storm. Today we file. Defamation, fraud, financial manipulation, full package. Her reply came so fast it was almost reassuring. We serve by Tuesday. Stand by. I let the phone drop gently to the desk, the vibration echoing against the wood like a drumbeat. Outside my window, the world was waking. The first lines of sunlight cut through the blinds, streaking across the floorboards of my small office. I looked up at the wall where family photographs still hung, Childhood birthdays, graduations, summer vacations, smiling faces, my father's hand on my shoulder, my mother's eyes bright, my siblings clustered around, the relics of a story I had once believed in. Now they stared back at me like relics of a fable rewritten. Sometimes the people who should love you most are the first to break you. The thought pulsed in my chest, not as bitterness, but as recognition. I minimized the folder of evidence and opened a new email draft. Address line, the moderators of the local business forum. Subject line, you'll want to see this. The body was concise, professional, edged with steel. I attached the screenshots, the legal documents, the Ryan message, receipts, not rhetoric. I hovered for a breath, then clicked send. The storm had been summoned. When I leaned back in my chair, I realized my chest wasn't tight anymore. The air still pressed heavy, but it wasn't suffocating. They wanted a public narrative. They wanted me painted as the villain in their fable, but this time, I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't hiding. I whispered into the quiet room, voice steady and unshaken. They thought they could bury me in lies. Instead, I'll bury them in truth. I closed my laptop, sat back, and watched the sun move across my studio wall. The morning light had softened to a glow. Outside, the Scottsdale streets were quiet. But inside, everything had changed. 2 months ago, I would never have imagined waking to a phone call from Emily Carter. They agreed to a public apology and settlement, she said. My heart stuttered. I stared at my reflection in the computer screen. This wasn't about money. It hadn't been. It was about my name. I opened the public statement from Dad. It read stiff, polished, hollow. I retract my prior accusations. I apologize to my daughter for misunderstandings. It sounded like someone drafting a press release for a company scandal. But I had forced it out. Justice, at last, though not loudly earned. Soon after, the Phoenix Business Forum quietly deleted all posts referencing me. Any trace of defamatory claims vanished. Comments, the viral threads, Dad's original statement. His business partners backed away. Contracts were canceled. A prominent investor quietly withdrew. The company he'd used as his legacy project crumbled under scrutiny. Callista, our aunt who had long held shares in the family portfolio, quietly sold her position and withdrew from involvement. She didn't issue statements. She simply disappeared from boards, from dinner invites, from every shared photo she used to caption, "Proud Aunt." Now, I stood in an art gallery filled with soft lighting, white walls, and elegant crowds. It was the opening of my desert photography series. The featured piece, Resilience, was a photograph I'd taken the day I filed the lawsuit. Dusty, sunlit, raw edges with a cracked lens flare. Beneath it, a caption, "From what was erased, a story remains." Gallery goers drifted through, murmuring. Some held their phones, reading the story of my journey in the gallery program, the lawsuit summary, the apology clause, the fact that my name would be restored publicly. A few stood in tears, shutters quiet in their hands, pointing. One older woman whispered, "Her photos carry fire, but also forgiveness." I walked through the room, past framed prints of dry washes, cactus blossoms, distant mesas at dusk. I overheard snippets. "She deserves this. They took so much." I'm glad she stood up. I paused at Resilience, tracing the light with my eyes, feeling the weight of reclamation. Back home later, the silence pressed in. No calls, no emails, just the stillness of my phone resting face down. I checked voicemail once, a message from Mom. The length was short, then deleted. The display read, "I hope you're happy." I didn't flinch. I didn't press play. Not anymore. I walked to my studio window and watched my neighbors' blinds shift as sunlight moved across their living room. My mind played back years of hidden effort, late nights editing, negotiating contracts, quietly sacrificing. I settled into my chair, pen and journal before me. I wrote, "Forgiveness doesn't mean letting them back in. It means setting yourself free." Beside me lay a sealed letter addressed to my future self. I'd crafted it years ago, a promise, a reminder. As I placed the pen down, I whispered, "They took my past. I claimed my future. Sometimes, the hardest battles we fight are with the very people who raised us. But standing up doesn't always mean yelling. It can mean protecting your truth, reclaiming your name, and choosing peace over permission. Have you ever had to walk away from family to find yourself? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful true stories that reveal the strength behind every scar.